Thank you very much. Y'all got to sit down. They called votes. Mitch McConnell is unfortunately running the Senate right now. And I'm going to have to sprint out of here. But I am so happy to be here, frankly, for the fellowship. This has been a difficult year for all of us. But I am grateful for this community. I'm grateful for this room. I'm grateful for folk like Danica. I am blown away, really, by the spirit that is sustaining truly a fight amidst difficult times. I want to thank the Jersey girls who just introduced me from Willingboro, New Jersey, the borough that's thorough, Carl Lewis's hometown. I want to thank you very much. Look, we are at a point in American history where indeed, as Danica said, we have to understand that, as James Baldwin wrote in The Fire Next Time, American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the impossible. And I am not under no illusions that we all are here, all of us, because we have had ancestors and allies who have fought through the trauma and the pain, the discrimination and the hate, have crawled forward, walked forward, strode forward, fought forward, so that we can be here today. And I'm under no illusion while we celebrate important, critical victories. The reality is this has been a frustrating, enraging, hurtful, painful year to see what has been going on. I give you simple examples from the president's discriminatory, un-American ban on transgender Americans from serving the country that they love, showing more courage and more heart and more patriotism than he did when it was his time to serve. From appointing an attorney general who I put my heart and passion to everything I could to stop from serving as attorney general, to put Jeff Sessions there and then have his refusal to protect LGBTQ Americans from employment discrimination. And then to put in, the president to put in a Secretary of Education who I stood on the Senate floor and warned that as soon as she got into the office, she would not stand up to protect children from discrimination. Her failure to protect trans students. This administration is showing us how dark the days still can be. But we don't need a reminder from this administration alone. We literally are coming from a time not that long ago when presidential candidates from the Democratic Party refused to stand up and say that all Americans have equal marriage rights. We still live in a nation with a majority of states. You can be fired from your job. You can be kicked out of your housing just because of who you are. And so we have work to do. But I am so grateful for Aisha for saying in her introductory remarks something that I try to remind all types of folk, from Jewish folks to Irish folks to poor folks to well-off folks to black folks to Jain folks to Baha'i folks, that there is an intersectionality. There is no justice for you without there being justice for me. That King, who marched, didn't march for black rights, he marched for our rights. He said clearly that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a common garment of destiny, that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And my favorite American author, a black man, a gay man, the great James Baldwin, who writing a letter to Angela Davis when she was unjustly incarcerated, he said clearly and plainly, if they come for you in the morning, they're going to come for me at night. We are all in this together. And I was raised by a family that reminded me that the rights I enjoy, that I luxuriate in, telling me that I drink deeply from wells of freedom and liberty and opportunity that I did not dig. My parents reminded me that I am here, that we are here as American citizens because of folk who in the funk and the hurt and the pain and the agony of their circumstances still found ways to stand up, not just for themselves, but for other folk. And my dad looked at me hard as a boy and told me that my obligations, I cannot pay these blessings back. I cannot pay the struggle, the sacrifice back to the people that made it, but I damn well better pay it forward with sweat, with work, with struggle. Now, my dad, I have to tell you, when he told me about the struggle and the hurt and the work, every time he would talk about those days when he was growing up, the stories got worse and harder and more challenging. I still remember one day he started, he said, son, when the tsunami hit my town. And I'm like, Dad, you grew up in the mountains of North Carolina. There's no way a tsunami hit your town. But he looks at me indignant. He's like, boy, it happened a long time ago. It was before the internet. You can't look it up. But it happened. My dad tells me this one story about trying to make this point to me about standing up and fighting and working. He says, boy, I was sitting in my school, and it started out as a school. Then it was a one-room schoolhouse. But eventually, it was like a lean-to on the side of the mountain. And he goes, son, I was sitting in my school, and the teacher comes in, and she says, class, I want to teach you all about self-esteem. Anybody who thinks you're dumb, thinks you're stupid, I want you to stand up right now. And my father said, nope, nobody moved. And she just stood there impatiently. She goes, come on now. You think you're dumb? You think you're stupid? Stand up. And my father said he finally just got a little impatient and just pushed his chair back and stood up proudly. And he said the teacher looked at him and said, hey, Mr. Booker boy, what's wrong? You think you're dumb? You think you're stupid? And my father said he scratched his head and said, well, shucks, ma'am, I don't think I'm stupid, but I didn't want you to be the only one standing. My father wanted me to understand that in this world, just because of who you are, people are going to discriminate against you. They're going to degrade you, but you got to stand up anyway. People are going to curse you and hate you, but you got to stand up anyway. You got to stand up because people stood for you and they fought for you and they struggled for you. Even if they didn't know they were going to win, they got beat down, failed time and time again, but they stood back up. We are here because of that struggle. I am here because of that level of patriotism. And what is patriotism? Patriotism is love of country, and you cannot love your country unless you love all of your countrymen and women. Now, we may not always agree. We may not even like each other all the time, but that's what love is. When they stormed beaches in Normandy, they stood up for all Americans, not just the ones that agreed with them or looked like them or prayed like them. They stood up. In the civil rights movement, they stood up and marched, not just for the people that looked like them or prayed like them or who they were, their gender identification, but they stood up. And this is the time now that we have to remember that. My father tells me stories about ordinary Americans are the ones that have always made change. I've learned this in Washington, that change doesn't come from Washington. It comes to Washington by ordinary Americans who work for it. Strom Thurmond didn't just sit back and think to himself, okay, I think it's time to have civil rights and voting rights for black folk. Well, he did make love to some black folk, we know that now, but the reality is, it took people coming and pressuring and fighting and pushing for that. Ordinary folks. When my daddy, mama couldn't take care of him. It was folks in that community that took him to their house, put food on the table, roof over his head. When he couldn't go to college, didn't even think about it. People told him, you're going to go to college. Ordinary folks, when he couldn't afford college, they took a collection in a church, giving him enough tuition to enroll in a historically black college, HBCU, named North Carolina Central. When he was in college, he said, it was amazing to me when I watched all of these folks in the early 1960s, when the sit-in movement started there in North Carolina, coming down, standing up for my rights. When my father got here to Washington, D.C., I don't care who you are, gay, Jewish, Irish, black, there was a time that corporate America didn't want you. And my father landed in D.C. where companies weren't hiring blacks, but it was activists in this town pulling together, fighting, pressuring, that led to him becoming IBM's first black salesman in the entire Virginia area. And what happens when you give people a shot to compete fairly on an equal playing field, equal justice under the law, equal employment rights? What happens? My father did well. They do well. My father began to make their top 5% global salesmen, gets a promotion to New Jersey, and then When he's trying to find homes to live in places with good schools that happen to be white neighborhoods, every time he and my mom would show up for a home, they would be told the house was sold. And then it was those ordinary Americans who said, this is not right, this is injustice. I may not be able to change the world, but I'm gonna stand up for the rights of others because I'm standing up for myself. It was an organization called the Fair Housing Council, got my father and mother a sting operation where they would go look at a house and a white couple would come behind them, find out the house was still for sale. On the house I grew up in that my parents fell in love with, they were told it was sold. The white couple came behind them and found out that it was still for sale. They put a bid on the house, the bid was accepted. Papers were drawn up, and on the day of the closing, the white couple didn't show up. My father did, and a volunteer lawyer. Walked into that real estate agent's office. The lawyer, Marty Friedman, confronts the real estate agent. Real estate agent jumps up, angry, doesn't relent, punches my dad's lawyer in the face, and sigs a dog on my dad. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, every time my dad would tell the story, the dog would get bigger. Eventually, son, I fought a pack of wolves to get you in this home. But the story was the same. It was ordinary Americans standing up. That is what has always made change in this country, and the question has got to be for us. Will we stand up? Because nothing will change unless we do. Will we stand up and work? Because nothing will work unless we do. Will we stand up like Danica stood up? Will we stand up like Andrea Jenkins stood up? Will we stand up? Stand up like Tyler Titus stood up. Will we stand up? Will we stand up like Jenny Durkin stood up? You see, we know from our own history that when people stand up, even when change isn't immediate, folk who stood up for workers' rights when there were sweatshops and child labor, many of them didn't live to see the day of universal public education and workers' rights, but they stood anyway, and we're on their shoulders. There are folks who stood up for the right for women to vote in this country, women who died in that fight, who would never see the success of universal suffrage, but they stood up anyway, and we stand on their shoulders. There are people that stood up in the civil rights movement that came together, black and white, Christian and Jewish, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, who would never see voting rights legislation that passed. They literally died and were buried in the swamps of Mississippi, but they stood up, and we stand on their shoulders. I don't believe the problem today is the bad people and the bad words and the bad actions. I believe the problem is not enough good people are standing up and doing the right things at the right time. Too many people on the sidelines, not realizing that the opposite of justice is not injustice, it's inaction, it is indifference, and it is silence. And so here we are, aptly named The Victory. This is about the victory. And I know there's hurt in this room, there's pain in this room, there's untold stories of obstacles faced in this room. Outside of this room today, someone didn't go to school because they were afraid of being bullying, of being beaten, of being maligned. Right now, today, 90 people shot and killed in this country. Some of them because of hate and bigotry. Right now, around this nation, there's pain. But I'm here to tell you right now, we may not be able to change the obstacles that we have to get through, but I know from my own life experience that we can get through. Look, my father died 6 days before I was elected to the United States Senate. I was in pain. It was a special election in October. He dies, I'm elected, and before you knew it, they sent me right down to Washington to fill the seat. And my mom, she was wise in her ways because she said, before you go to the floor of the Senate, I'm going to take you to see John Lewis. John Lewis is my hero. In fact, when we first unveiled the Equality Act, there were 4 or 5 speakers, sponsors of that bill. He was right there because he knows intersectionality. I went to see him on that day, and it was amazing. This man is like, his office is like a museum of the civil rights movement, except for he's in all the pictures. And I'm overwhelmed because this man should have some swagger, but he is so humble. He sits me down, won't let me get up. He's bringing my mom and me grits and telling me what it means to him to see the 4th ever elected African American enter the Senate. And I'm telling you, after this spiritual coming together where he's affirming the progress and still the work to do, we leave there, and I don't know, but I think this is a moment in American history that never happened before. A United States senator is going from the House side to the Senate side to be sworn in as a United States senator. I don't think this has ever happened before. And he's walking there, and his mama is there lecturing him the entire way. Because my mom was on fire. She just sat with John Lewis, and she's like, boy, don't you forget where you came from. Don't forget the struggle and the sacrifice and the labor that got you here. You best appreciate this and remember that the title doesn't make the man. The man's got to make the title. And I'm looking at my mom. I'm like, Mom, I'll be back in a few minutes. You're going to see me again. We can have this conversation. This is embarrassing. About a year later, I decided to write a book. And now I have to fact check all those family stories. And with my father, that's difficult. I mean, was it a pack of wolves? Or was it just a dog? And so I start going back. I'm trying to find folk. And I find the head of the Fair Housing Council from 1960s. She was easy to find because she is still the head of the Fair Housing Council of New Jersey today. Miss Lee Porter, 92 years old. And now she's not representing black families anymore. She's representing Muslim families and same-sex couples. Intersectionality. I bring this elderly African-American queen into my room who's showing me it doesn't matter the title you have or the position. You keep your hands on the plow and you keep fighting for justice. And I sit her down. I literally get on my knees before her and thank her profusely and then tell her I had to confirm some facts that I'd heard from my father. I just wasn't sure they were true. And I said, I need to meet the lawyer, Marty Friedman. Do you have his contact information? And she says, no, he's dead. Think of the shame that I felt at that moment, that the guy who took a punch for my family, I never said thank you. Y'all, all of us in this room should be thanking somebody who helped to get us here, somebody whose shoulders we stand on. And she saw the pain that I couldn't say thank you. She said, but find this other lawyer. His name is Arthur Lessman. He organized all the lawyers. You can confirm the story. I appreciate it. I called him up. Good that I did because he would die very soon later. And I started talking to him. He confirmed it was a dog, not a pack of wolves. And he tells me the story. But then I start getting curious, like, why? Why would this white man in the 1960s start helping black people integrate his neighbor? Talk about love thy neighbor. He was bringing African Americans into his community to live like my family. I want to know why. And he said, Cory, I was sitting comfortably on my couch one Sunday. And breaking in was the news. And there I saw a bunch of people who had started marching in Selma and got caught on their way to Montgomery, got on a bridge, and I watched with my eyes these Alabama state troopers with billy clubs beating them down. John Lewis gets his head cracked open, bleeds the southern soil red. And I was so moved by the injustice, I went to work the next day and told my partner, we got to go to Alabama. And he laughed at me, not because it was funny, but because what was funny was his thought that we had enough money to even afford a plane ticket to Alabama. We had just started this business. It was tough going. And so we sat there for a little while and thought to ourselves, what can we do? And then we realized, well, maybe we should just do the best we can with what we have where we are. And we started calling around to folk to see who needed our help. And eventually we found this woman named Miss Lee Porter who said she was desperately in need of lawyers to help her fight this case. And the next thing you know, he starts working for them. And a couple years later, he gets the case file that says Cory and Carolyn Booker. Now let me tell you something. Those marchers didn't make their goal. They got beaten down and beaten back. But that's not what we're called to do. We're not called to win every fight. We're not called to have victory every day. But we are called to be in the fight. We are called to stand up. We are called to be in the struggle until everyone has liberty and justice for all. That's what patriotism is. Love. Love ain't easy. Love is hard. I always say, if this country hasn't broken your heart, you don't love her enough. We who are lovers have to understand the power of love, even if you don't win, even if you don't make it to your destination, even if you don't get to Montgomery. Just by standing up, love transforms. Those marchers on that bridge, I don't know their names, maybe one of them I do, but those average Americans who stood up righteously for love of country, instantaneously their love left 1,000 miles and changed the hearts of people in New Jersey, who would then go on and get involved and change the outcome for generations not yet born. That is the power of our love. Just by standing and turning our oaths into action, just by turning our pledge into a passionate pursuit, just by changing the songs we sing into the work we do. This changes things, even if it's imperceptible to our eyes. We're making a difference for generations yet unborn. And that's what this moment needs right now. It needs people that are willing to stand up, to step out, to come forward, to jump in. This is what this moment needs right now, for people to understand we were not born to crawl or even walk. We were born to soar. We're not born to fit in. We're born to stand out. We weren't born to whisper. We're born to roar. This is what our country needs. Like Frederick Douglass, who said, I prayed for years for my freedom, but I was still a slave. It wasn't until I started praying with my hands and praying with my feet that I found my salvation. It's like that theologian who said, everywhere I go, I preach the gospel, but only sometimes do I use words. Well, we have a civic gospel in this country, and I'm one of those folks that says, before you tell me about your religion, show it to me in how you treat other people. Show it to me in what you do. Show it to me in how you serve. Show it to me in how you live. And show it to me in how you give. And so I'm telling you right now, I don't care who's in the White House or the outhouse. This is about us right now. We have to take responsibility. And this is the good news. This is the good news. We all can define this country. It's Langston Hughes who said, America never was America to me, but I swear this oath, America will be. We define what America, we say what this country is. America is Jim Obergefell, fighting for the right to call his soulmate his husband. He said America will be and change this country. America is the candidates and volunteers who keep knocking on doors, who keep making calls, who refuse to give in and give up even when it seems hopeless or impossible to get a trans woman elected in the state of Virginia. But they said America will be. America is the trans soldier who serves his country with dignity and honor, even though he won't experience the same when he gets home, he says, America will be. Love is that, America is that country growing up, that child growing up in this country, in this nation. America is the right of a child of any gender identity or sexual orientation to be accepted in school, to experience patriotism, to experience love. That child, their very existence is the promise, is the hope that America will be. So my friends, I tell you tonight, America never was America to my ancestors. America never was America to the 24 murdered trans women last year. America never was America to a man dragged to his death just because of who God created him to be. But I believe in my heart that if we, the handful that we are, do not shirk our duty now, if we remember from whence we came, if we know that American history is a perpetual testimony to the achievement of the possible, if we stand up, if we stand together, if we stand strong, if we are unrelenting, indefatigable, and tireless in our patriotic duty, I know we can change this nation and make the hope of this country, the love of this country, the justice of this country real and true in our generation. And if we love that way, if we fight that way, we may not make it to our destination, but I promise you this right now, generations yet unborn will feel the warmth and the heat of our love, and we will have indeed done what every generation should strive to do: honor those ancestors who struggled and fought, and some of them fell in the days before us. May God bless America, and may we remember that we are the blessings that must work to make this truly a country that is truly blessed. Thank you.